Right, welcome here to this lesson on early societies in the Americas and Oceania. This is kind of the last part of the world that we will go through in the context here of early civilizations. So we've pretty much covered after this week. We're going to cover everything. But the last two sort of parts of the world of human migration to the world are the Americas and Oceania. So this lecture will kind of talk about the migration patterns to the Americas. We'll start there. Follow that up with a little bit of how the sort of distinct regions of Americas shaped out over time. Look at early states in the Americas, how they in early societies and civilizations. Then we'll switch to Oceania and look at how people migrated and passed through Oceania, and then ultimately focus on the distinct group of these Lapita peoples that emerged throughout sort of near Polynesia, if you will. And the reason that sort of Americas and Oceania are grouped together is because they have a sort of similar. There's a comparativeness, a similarity between how these worlds were settled. Both Americas and Oceania, humans came to a rather bit later in the sort of phase of human history, in the Paleolithic phase. So, as we'll see, people migrated to the Americas; they had to walk there, whereas in Oceania, people had to take a ship there. So there are a little bit different ways in which these areas were settled a little bit later in the sort of human historical record. And again, these vast areas, at least the Americas had to, peoples coming to the Americas had to inhabit this vast two continents that had vast amount of space and places and rivers and all those things that we need for various complex societies. And obviously Oceania is, again, the Pacific Ocean is the largest body of water on Earth. And, I mean, covered in islands, and each one of those islands were, for any inhabitable island in Oceania that humans did get to. So we'll talk about those sort of patterns there. And then kind of complex societies, how they sort of developed in these different regions. America, Northern America, sort of it's predominantly hunting and gathering, though we do have some evidence of some more permanent settlements and as we'll talk about, sort of terraforming of the North. Central, this is where the settled states and it came up early, like more complex societies. What we've looked at in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. And then the South, South America, both of those, we have state settlements and hunting and gathering as well. In Oceania, we have progressive settlements of islands, interconnected maritime networks that we'll talk about and expand on later on in the lesson. So, settling of the Americas. This is an interesting historical lesson because this is a good example of when there's a historical theory that exists, and then new evidence comes up and that challenges theory. So new historical theories have to address it. So the settling of the Americas is an idea that has changed over time. This is a good example of history changing. That originally it was very much felt that during the Ice Age, the land between Siberia or Asia and North America was existed. There was a land bridge people could come across. Then they could go down there, these sort of corridors, and they found archaeological evidence here that then humans could come in and settle all of these places. And then slowly, right, just kind of move their way down north to south. Right? Probably, estimated about 25,000 to 10,000 BCE. Most likely waves of migration, that it wasn't like, this is a little misleading. It wasn't simply just, one group moving down here, but people would come in, someone would go down here, someone would go over there, someone would settle over here, some other groups, so it wasn't most likely, and that is probably part of the story, that there were definitely waves of migration. And then the first sort of kind of evidence we have of human activity or large-scale sort of imprint of humans was believed to be about circa 12,000, called the Clovis people. And they are named after this site in New Mexico, where they had these very distinctive arrowheads. And then these types of arrowheads, these Clovis arrowheads, have then been found throughout most of North America. So they think that this is an example of material culture shifting, that somebody came up with a new way to make an arrowhead, and then those technology shifted and were spread, diffused around different societies in North America, which suggests that these were much more complex, settling into more um, uh, uh, interconnected networks over space, and it fits really nice into this sort of um, Neolithic transition stage. So it really made a lot of sense, right? That here you have that spear tips, are a lot of archaeological similarities. This also coincides, interestingly, to the loss of sort of megafauna in the Americas. Up in North America, they used to have a horse that went away. Mammoths went away. Large hunting cats like the saber-toothed tiger. So they do think there's a correlation between human migration and and the loss of these large animals. So again, we're kind of seeing the impact of humans, and that all made sense because that's all the evidence they had. Until they started finding more evidence along these cave sites along North America and all the way, and one here, Monteverde, Chile, down here in South America, that were all predated these Clovis sites, right? So then the question was, okay, if we all, what we have here is that we have a lot of evidence for people moving across in this Clovis site in New Mexico, spread around North America. No real Clovis points down here, but that's, that's because they came down a little later. So why do we have all of these caves along the coast, and particularly this site in South America that predates all of our knowledge, right? And this is what early historians, archaeologists were confronted with. So they said, hey, maybe there's something else going here. So they had to rearrange the way they looked at these migration patterns. They came up with what is now pretty much identified as this new coastal migration hypothesis. It said, yes, people were definitely coming over land bridges, but they most likely humans also came across the ocean, right? I mean, that's, if you go from Japan up these islands into the Aleutians, and if there's a lot of ice here that you could kind of go along the ice corridors, that would make a lot of sense. So now they think that another wave of peoples also came along that could go back. I mean, this is where we get pushed back to about 25,000 years ago. Sort of all this evidence points to much earlier, but here we have some areas that predate all of this movement. So, and how they jump from North America all the way to South America. Well, if you went on land, that would take you a long time, but by ship, it's totally fine. And we know that humans were able to adapt and build these kind of things. So that's so it's very interesting. So this is a new way to look at new explanations for the peopling of the Americas. And they're also started thinking now that there may be they're finding more evidence for another wave of peoples that came up and settled from Europe and settled in these parts of the Americas. And we'll get this a little bit later, but there is also evidence of connections between the Pacific and South America, that these early oceanic navigators were able to come and made landfall and set up some sort of connections between South America and Oceania. So that's kind of some of these new discoveries. Another major new discovery was this in Colombia, which again, South America, these huge, they're like 8-mile long rock art. So again, we have this rock art phenomenon. And another thing they found in White Sands, New Mexico, are these footprints in an old lake bed that date back to 21,000 BCE. So our understanding of how people came to America has changed over time. And we can see this, right? And again, I think language is a really important part of human history and how languages developed over time. And you see what's really interesting about the Americas is there's no single language family. So again, we talked about Indo-European last week with the Indo-Aryans, which is one language that a language family that has all these different branches. So you can kind of see the spread of people. These Indo-Europeans at one point probably all lived together and then spread out over time and brought their language with them. Well, in the Americas, you don't see this. There's no single linguistic family that accounts for all of this, which tells us or reflects in there that most likely these represent different waves of people who spoke a different language. You can kind of see there are some major ones, Algonquin, and some of these are somewhat related. But Algonquin is is large over this sort of North America, Great Plains. Uto-Aztecan is a major one. There, here, Mayan over here is another major one, and then you can kind of see Araucan and then the Caribbean. So you see these different language groups that reflect different movements of different people at different times. North America, the 296 languages, largest Algonquin. Most common today is Uto-Aztecan or Nahuatl. California alone, there are 74 different languages, and again, that I think that talks to or expresses the ability of people to grow and live in the California region. It's always been very fertile, very welcoming and hospitable to humans today and as well as in the past. Central America, the Nahuatl is still the most spoken language there. There's about 29 languages. Mayan is common, is still spoken today, but all Nahuatl is what the Aztecs spoke, which is this Uto-Aztecian language. Then South America is just a huge linguistic area. 350 languages there, especially in the Amazon rainforest. I mean, just all this linguistic diversity. About 350 languages. One of the most linguistically diverse places in the world. Again, when you're talking about diverse languages, that tells us again that people came in, brought their own language, either isolated themselves, kept speaking that language. I mean, languages also change over time and adapt, or they came in contact with other people and then created sort of a Creole language, then created its own language. So just eons, millennia of mixing back and forth throughout those regions. So this is the early peopling of the Americas.